All right, everyone. So this is going to be our betting preview. Now, this is early, right? So we'll be doing individual games throughout the week, but I wanted to give an overlook Thursday, the Sunday game. So even if you're watching this on Friday, you could still, take some value from this because we're going to be talking about all of these games to the best of my ability. This is literally my first reaction to these lines and what I'm thinking. And then as we go through the week, I'll give you guys my official plays. So let's start here with the Commanders and Packers. Now, this is an interesting game because we see the numbers at 3.5, which is not a great number if you're looking to bet the Packers, right? It is low. I mean, we're talking a 4-point win, but three, 2.5, all of these are key numbers, and we're getting none of them. So if this is a close game, win by a field goal, you have no chance here with this one, right? And it just really is a thing, in my opinion, where it's like, are the Packers going to have a sizable lead or win on a touchdown down the stretch of this game? So this is a worrying thing for me when I'm looking at it, is going, look, I may like the Packers, but this number, we may want to wait for this to move. The other kind of question you have about a game like this is we don't, after week one, we don't really know what we're looking at with either one of these teams, because what we saw from the Packers beating the Lions was certainly impressive, right? I mean, they really dominated that game from start to finish. My pushback is, first off, we've seen the Lions have that type of game over the past few years. Yes, they've had great records and they've been one of the best teams in the NFL, but there are those games when you get pressure on Goff, he turns the ball over, and the Lions just don't look that great. That's something that happens. And so we just don't know, okay, is this Packers team now with Micah Parsons head and shoulders better than they were last year? On the flip side, you could feel the same way with the Commanders. I really was locked in and watched a lot of that Commanders Giants game, and a lot of people are pointing to, well, Giants aren't that great this year. But watching that game, one thing you realize is that it really was the tale of two halves, right? So in the first half, the Commanders defense was just getting, making life miserable for the Giants. They even had a fourth and goal stop, which ended up being a penalty, and then they made the Giants kick a field goal. Like, they stopped the Giants in 7 straight plays on the goal line. It was impressive. The offense looked super impressive. In that second half, that game was really, the difference in it was Russell Wilson's inability to hit the deep ball. There were Giants receivers running open. So that really worries me going into this game. If the Commanders, they had a good week one because the Giants didn't play well, the Giants were without Andrew Thomas. If that reason is why they looked and were able to win that game, and we end up seeing the Packers really be able to get to Jane Daniels, shut down that offense, and that defense isn't as improved as it looked week one against the Giants, then this is an easy spread for the Packers to cover. So this is one of those games that I'm waiting until Thursday to bet, because right now I just don't really have the number I'm looking for. And it's not the now, if you like the Commanders, maybe you go ahead and get in on the plus 3.5, because you're like, look, if this thing falls to 3 or 2.5, I'm out, right? Maybe that's the way you feel about it. But I could see this thing trending both ways, and I could see a pretty strong argument. And I gotta, like I said, do some more research on the games for my official pick. But this line right now just feels like Vegas chiseled this thing in stone in a great way, right? This really is a line that I could see w- arguments on betting both sides. Okay, moving to the New York Giants and Dallas Cowboys game. So you see it right here. Obviously, +6 Giants. The total is 44.5. Giants are +210 on the money line, and the Cowboys are -258. So look, much like what we were looking at last week, the Giants, we just don't know what they're going to be. I like to follow some of, like, they're not really reporters for the teams, but there's guys that will just send out all 22 clips of various teams. And there's one guy who I follow who throws out Giants all 22 clips, and he was breaking some of the film down. And one thing you notice was that this game was really lost for the New York Giants at the line of scrimmage, right? So the offensive line without Andrew Thomas was just unable to keep Russell Wilson at all in the pocket. And also, Russell Wilson by the end of the game was kind of bailing out of the pocket early. If the Cowboys can't get that type of pass rush that's needed, and if Andrew Thomas is back in and healthy, you know, I think these Giants receivers are going to be able to make some plays down the field. They were open against the Commanders. Wilson was just unable to get them the ball. And if that's the case, That Giants defense, it was not great in the first half of the Commanders game, but in the second half, that defense locked up and that pass rush was getting there. Now, Daniels was able to get out of the pocket a few times and burn them, but I really thought they did a good job game planning. And I could see the same in this game. They could really make life rough for Dak Prescott and company. On the flip side of this, if the Giants don't have Andrew Thomas in the lineup and they're unable to hit those deep plays, this Giants team is going to look similarly to it did last year. And the Cowboys, after the week one performance they had, not getting a win, I think that's going to cut both ways because on one hand, you could say, well, they look good, so they're going to be able to beat the Giants. On the flip side, that's going to be dejecting, right? Really dejecting for playing that week one game. You're locked in, you're loaded. You played probably the best game you could have thought you could have played. And, he came down to drops from CD Lamb, right? I just don't think that, I think that's very dejecting, right? From a team standpoint. But if the Giants aren't good, the Cowboys have too much talent on offense for a not good Giants team to even cover a 6-point spread. So like I said, we'll give you our pick down late, but that's kind of the way I'm looking at this now. And I'm interested to see if this thing hits itself up to 7 at any point. It might not. I think just like last week with the Commanders, my guess is sharp money is going to be going onto the Giants. And if that's the case, maybe you ride with it. But it was one of the things that worried me, although I did think the Giants were going to cover was one of the things that worried me with the Giants in week one was it just felt like there was such a vibe of this game's a lock. It's definitely going to be close. And there was a world, by the way, where the Giants Commanders game was closer than it was. There was a world in which that covered. That's just not the world we had because of Andrew Thomas and Russell Wilson being unable to kind of hit receivers that were open. That was because he either didn't have time or he kind of threw it short. All right, the next one is the Jets versus the Bills. Now, this is a game that, once again, we're not giving our plays yet, but I'm going to give as close to a play as possible already on this one. Now, I would love to see a little line movement to 7. Just give us that 7. Even if it can't get to 7.5, I would rather be willing to push on 7 than on the plus 6.5. But I really like the Jets here. I've been a huge backer of Aaron Glenn. I just think when you see what he did, everyone kind of focused on, well, when Aaron Glenn was defensive coordinator, the Lions defense wasn't always great. I had a completely different view. The Lions defense, I mean, it has standout stars, but it had injuries. It was not the more talented side of the ball. And Aaron Glenn always had them playing hard, and they would always come up with those key plays. It was one of the reasons that Detroit Lions team was as successful as it was. Whoops, we got to refresh this here. But it was one of the reasons that it was as successful as it was, right? And so I love what he's done already. You saw it in week one where they got it. I didn't think the Jets were going to be a good team in terms of win total, but they're a team that's going to be in every game. And the Bills coming off a win over the Ravens, that was shocking. It was one of the best games I've seen, maybe ever, right? Coming off that win, I think this is a great spot to bet the Jets at home. I think they're going to be able to keep this game close. Once again, not giving my official play yet, but if I was to bet a game now, this would be one of them that I'd be like, yeah, that's the side I'm leaning on. And here's my other worrying thing for the Bills is, we could take out the fact, right, that they ended up winning because Josh Allen is phenomenal. But the Ravens, the Bills didn't look perfect throughout that whole game. They looked like they had some holes. And if that's the case, we're not talking about the Jets having to win this game outright. We're saying 7 points. Can they keep it within 7? Against this Bills team in kind of a letdown spot? I think that is the case. All right, Niners and Saints. Now this is interesting because a lot of people, Saints were kind of the going to be the worst team in the league, right? That's what kind of conventional wisdom was going into this season. They played a little bit, I think, as they call it, friskier than expected in week one. And so this is kind of an interesting spot. The 49ers, Brock Purdy, a little bit injured. They're having some injury problems. And this is 4.5. 4.5 is a ugly number. Okay. This is a number, especially as a road favorite, you do not want to see. So I have two things going through my head. And this is where, and we're not placing the bet yet, like I've been saying, but this is where my head is at currently. To me, you take the teams out of this in terms of like how talented you think they are, and let's think in terms of narrative, right? So on one hand, the road favorite in the 49ers, a team that, is if they're going to make the playoffs this year and if they're going to be a good team, they're not going to be a team blowing people out. Just like they won in week 1, they're going to be winning ugly all the way throughout the season. And I just don't trust a team like that with a 4.5 point spread. Look, I feel like the 49ers are a team that, sometimes they could finish off the deal and go ahead and get the win, but it's always ugly. It's never that complete dominant performance. And I think that's the case here, right? I really think that's important to focus in on. And on the flip side of this, we have to factor in, do we think the Saints are now getting too much credit? You see this all the time. There's an overreaction to the stuff that we see in week 1 instead of like, okay, maybe the Saints played better week 1 than we thought they would, but it doesn't mean you kind of throw everything away that we thought, right? Maybe the Saints really are that bad. Being at home is certainly a big deal for the Saints, but this is what I'm going to have to think more on. But that's really what I'm going to be deciding. Between those two big factors, you have a team that I just don't trust to. It's not to win games, but I just don't trust them to cover spreads all that much, uh, especially ones that are 4.5. And on the flip side, or I should say cover spread as favorites. And on the flip side, we have a Saints team that kind of now has been revitalized from this team is definitely the worst in the league to, well, maybe they're bad, but they might be frisky, right? And those two ideas are kind of what are going to factor in to me covering or deciding which side is going to cover this game. So the next game, the Browns and the Ravens. Now, when we talk about lines that are, you know, this is a game that you look at right now, and regardless of the outcome, you're going to look in the mirror if you lose this bet and say, it was obvious. It is obvious that the Ravens are going to beat the Browns by 30 points. It is obvious that the Browns are going to cover a 10.5 point spread when the Browns play within their division so tough. The Ravens are a team that can play ugly, right? Even like a lot of people would think this is kind of a revenge spot. I don't know if that's even the case, right? Like because of how bad they played in week 1. I could see this being almost a letdown, right? So I don't have a play in this one yet, but I look at this game and I will be betting it. But man, this game is a nightmare to bet because both sides of this thing make a ton of sense. The Ravens, after losing in the fashion they did, going out and just destroying the Browns makes complete sense to me. The Ravens, after that close game, getting into a situation where they play just ugly football. There's turnovers. Joe Flacco scores a few points. This thing is a field goal game in the fourth quarter. Now we got that 10.5 point spread, and the Ravens end up winning by 7, or the Ravens win by 10, and the Browns still cover. I could see that. We saw last week with the Bengals. This happens year in and year out where it's all divisions, but specifically this division. It doesn't matter how bad the Browns are, doesn't matter how bad the Steelers are, the Ravens, the Bengals. These teams are going to all play each other tough, and it's a nightmare. So I don't know where I'm going with this yet, but this 10.5 is a big, big number. Okay, the next one, the Jags and the Bengals. So this is a quite interesting game as well because the Jags, I think they exceeded expectations in week 1, albeit against the Panthers. And the Bengals, they looked just like the Bengals have in, it's the whole point of this preseason was let's get off to a better start this year. And the Bengals, what did they do? They played terribly against the Browns, probably should have lost that game, but did end up with a win. So that is a huge difference and a huge big up for them, right? That's a point up. But the Bengals did not come out and look like they wanted to. This is a spot I feel like they can. I think the Jags might be getting a little bit more press and praise because they were able to handle, the Panthers in the way that they did. But look, I'm gonna not bet it yet. But if this number can fall to 3, if this number somehow falls to 2.5, I like the Bengals here. I just the Jags are just a tough. Forget all the talent that the Jags may have in various places. You just can't trust them. You just can't trust them. And so right now I'm leaning pretty heavy Bengals, but if it stays at 3.5, I will say it makes it a tougher game to bet. That's for sure because we've just seen too much of the Bengals early in the year not putting on good performances. All right, Rams and Titans, ugly number, ugly number. Last week, it was like the Broncos were the hot team. Coming into the season, everyone thought, yeah, this is a championship team for sure. The Titans played them very tight in terms of like that was even though you know uh the Broncos won by 8, it was a tight game. The Titans ended up covering the spread, and they really made it a grind them out. They're back at home. It's 5.5. The Rams ended up getting a win, but that game was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So right now, when I'm looking at this, it really comes down to how much do you trust this Rams team? Because this Titans team, I just think it's probably going to be playing gritty and tough all year. And at home, plus 5.5. Maybe the Rams win by a field goal. That's where I'm leaning right now. I just don't see a lot of argument for what the Rams are going to do because it feels like the Rams are kind of just look. They won week one. They're going to kind of just keep biding their time and getting these close wins, and then if they make it to the playoffs, and then in the playoffs, maybe they go on some miraculous run. I don't see them blowing out teams. Now, once again, this could be one of those frustrating games where it's ugly, 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 tied, close all the way through, and the Rams score a touchdown late, win by 7, and we get caught holding the 5.5 bag, which is just not what you want to be doing. Okay, next game, Patriots and Dolphins. Man, this is a battle of two teams. So I was all over the Colts in in week one. Knew the Dolphins were going to get beat. I was on the Patriots, and if you go back and watch our preview, one of the things that scared me so much about that bet was I felt like I liked the Patriots a little bit too much, and and lo and behold, the Raiders ended up winning that game. I'm leaning right now on the Dolphins just because I really think that I expected a lot more from a Mike Vrabel coach team in week one. I thought the fact that they got outmanned in a lot of ways by a team that look, both these teams had first year head coaches, right? Or not first year head coaches in terms of their first time coaching. They both have veteran coaches, but for their teams, right? Both Pete Carroll, that's his first time with the Raiders, first game. Mike Vrabel, the exact same thing. The Raiders brought in Geno Smith. They made some significant changes. The Patriots still had that high draft pick quarterback that they had from last year, who was a rookie last year, but in Drake May. And I just didn't see enough. I just don't trust this team. I didn't see the fight, and I thought they had a good chance of winning week one. I'm not going to trust them on the road against the Dolphins. The one thing the Dolphins do have, you can call them a lot of things, and this team is definitely not going to be very good this year. But in this spot, after getting embarrassed the way they did, I could see this being that Dolphins game, which you get every once in a while, where they could just score the football, where we see Tyreek Hill going for, a long touchdown here, over 100 yards of total, receiving yards. I could see that in this game where the Patriots, they just, this is kind of, they fall to 0-2 being on the road here, and the Dolphins for that one game find what we thought was so good about them. But this is going to be tight because I don't trust either of these teams. And I do think the Dolphins are one of the worst teams in the NFL, but they're one of the worst teams in the NFL with like a shockingly good talent at certain skill positions. So in that case, I think this is one of those games where they get over the hump, and even if it's one of the few games they win all year. But once again, this could change come Friday, Saturday, or Sunday morning when I potentially bet these games. All right, next game, Seahawks and Steelers. I'm pretty locked in on betting the Steelers here as a favorite at home. Um, you know, I just think the Steelers are exactly what I thought they were going to be this year. I was really not on board with a lot of the criticisms of Aaron Rodgers as it pertained to he can't play anymore. I thought watching his time with the Jets was a story of dysfunction in the organization, craziness all around. And, he played a part in that, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't see it as this guy can't throw the football. To me, even when he was on the Jets, when he had time in the pocket, when his receivers were catching the ball, he made good plays. And yes, he's older. He's going to have bad plays and plays when he looks older. But the Steelers don't need him to be MVP Aaron Rodgers. They just need him to be pretty good. And seeing them as a 3-point favorite at home, if this was in Seattle, maybe I would feel a little bit different. But a 3-point favorite at home, perfect number right there, I think, with three. If we can get it at 2.5 or two, maybe that would be preferable. But at three, I have no problem with it. I'm just not a big believer in the Seahawks. They didn't do, in my opinion, a lot of good for themselves this offseason. I mean, you made some pretty drastic changes, and I'm talking on the offensive end. And, you bring in Sam Darnold, who I have nothing against Sam Darnold, but I just don't think, getting rid of Geno and putting Sam Darnold in there was the correct move. You lose DK Metcalf. And I think we saw a lot of that week one. Week one, that was the Seahawks moment, week one, to really make a statement to the division, really, that hey, we're in the runnings for this thing. Okay. We're at home and we're in the runnings for this thing. And they only score 13 points. It just isn't good enough. This is just not good enough. And I know Smith and Jigba had, 9 receptions for 124 yards. They have some talent. Don't get me wrong. I just think you're just not going to be able to upset the Steelers, which is a team that their defense didn't play great in week one. I think that defense is going to find itself here. The offense is going to not be as good either as what it was in week one, but make the right plays and pretty easily cover this spread at home. All right, moving on to the Bears and the Lions. So this is another one of those games that, man, Vegas, they just don't make life easy for us, okay? They set these lines as good as possible. The Lions, they did not look good in week one, but I'm not ready to jump off their bandwagon yet, for the main reason of I've seen that game I saw week one over the past 2 years every once in a while, right? There are games where Jared Goff and the Lions can move the football, but then they turn the ball over. They can move the football, they just can't finish drives. They just, everything doesn't click for them and it looks like they're getting destroyed. I've seen that game a million times, so I'm not ready to get off their bandwagon because they usually bounce back and can rattle off some wins. 5.5 points is still a lot of points. I mean, this means that you are, winning by at least more than, or I mean, more than a touchdown, but it really is just not necessarily. This is a line that the Lions are going to have dominated this game in some, in some manner. On the flip side of this, the Bears, look, the Bears had a lot of bad in their Monday Night Football game, especially to end that game, but they're going to be ready to go to try to get this win. Look, Caleb Williams, he's not going to look if they drop this game bad and the Bears have a bad season overall, Caleb Williams, he is going to be on the hot seat, right? And it doesn't mean I'm saying that he's going to be benched at the end of this season or something. I'm just pointing out that there's every year that he is not good, the media criticism gets a little bit louder, right? What people think is going to get a little bit more, like, instead of saying he's still young, it's going to be, is it time to move off of Caleb Williams? And I'm not driving that bandwagon. I think he could be a good quarterback, and I think it's way too early to kind of start asking these questions, but that's not going to stop the media from asking these questions. So I think Caleb understands, and Ben Johnson, kind of coming back to Detroit here, I think there's going to be, these guys understand that if you don't want this year to be a complete throwaway, you could do some damage to your biggest rival, or one of the biggest rivals, I should say. Not really, probably I would say the Packers probably the biggest rival, but in division, right? If you could beat the Lions here and send them to 0-2, you just got a leg up and sent the Lions way down, right? People are going to start asking some serious questions, and we're getting 5.5 points. So you could have the Lions win by a field goal, and we still cover this game, but it is in the Lions building off a loss. I think that probably will spell disaster for the Bears. But I'm going to wait and see where this line moves, because if we get, up to 6 or something like that, maybe the Bears become more of a play, or if it falls to 5, five's not really a key number, so it doesn't matter. But we're going to wait and see how this kind of shakes out before betting that one. So the Panthers and the Cardinals, once again, what do you think? What's your reaction to week one? On the Panthers side of this, they looked like the bad Panthers, right? They looked like the Panthers in which, people were like, okay, Bryce Young was a bust, not the one where Bryce Young gets benched, comes back, and he looks a little bit better. On the flip side, the Cardinals, oops, I don't know why this thing keeps moving like this, but on the flip side of this, right, you have the on the flip side of this, you have the Cardinals. Sorry, as I was doing that, they only won by 7. Right, this was against a New Orleans team that was viewed as by far the worst team in the NFL, and you were unable to kind of really showcase that. You got the win; it was by 7, but we don't really know yet what the Cardinals are. And if the Panthers, if they just had a one-off week one bad game, kind of got shocked by the way the Jaguars played, and they come back, this is going to be a tight game for me. I'm going to wait and see where this line moves before I place a bet. If we get line movement in kind of either way to 6 or to 7, That may determine which way I bet this thing. But this is really one of those games that if this game was at one, there would be probably a 0% chance I bet it just because which really isn't smart gambling. You should never really bet games that you're not strong on, anyways. But for me, if I want to have some bets in play at four, then maybe I have to get in somewhere on this game. But if this thing was at one, it would be, in the trash. No way, because I just can't trust either of these teams. All right. The next game, the Broncos and the Colts. Now, let me be clear. I'm very high in the Colts. I was saying all last year, I'm saying it again this year, that the kind of hate that Daniel Jones gets, and I'm not saying he's a top five quarterback in the NFL, right? He's nowhere near that. But this is a guy and you see what's happening with Russell Wilson now. It wasn't all his fault in New York. The Giants weren't just, oh, it was the quarterback play was the reason that they stunk. There was a lot of other things that went into that. Okay. And I think he showed it week one against a bad Dolphins team. On the flip side of this, I think the Broncos, we haven't seen yet what everybody is, constantly kind of is kind of putting out into the world, right? Look, I think Sean Payton's done a good job taking them from a franchise that felt like it was kind of with the big Russ Wilson deal. It felt like, this entire franchise was like falling apart with, man, when is this team going to be good again? They got this massive contract they still got to pay out. It was disaster town for the Broncos. And Sean Payton comes in and he does his best job to clean that situation up. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for it because now everybody's driving the Broncos hype train. I just haven't seen it quite yet. And it doesn't mean by the end of the year this team can't be really good. But to me, the culture at home, the Colts just always seem to find a way to be a mediocre team every year. It's like the Colts are never okay. They're never going to have those 2 wins. They might not have 15 wins, but they're going to be 9, 8 or 9, right? Maybe 10. I think this year they're going to be very good. I think they're being way underlooked. And so right now I'm leaning with the Colts. Now, if this thing moves too far or if I see the public going too hard onto the Colts, maybe I will change my mind on that because I do think that matters. When it's almost like you're kind of judging the stock market in a way of, okay, I like this team, but they're too valued right now. I don't think the Colts have quite gotten to that point yet because I think a lot of people feel, yeah, they beat the Dolphins. That's fine. I think a lot of people were way on the Broncos. And this, to me, this Vegas line screams take the Broncos. 2.5, great number. This is one of those bets that is ugly because I bet it's going to be close. So right now I'm leaning the Colts. Could change, but right now I'm on the Colts. Here we go. Right, one of the biggest games of the slate, probably honestly the biggest game of the slate, the Eagles and the Chiefs, the Super Bowl rematch in week 2. Now, the Chiefs obviously are coming off a loss, and it was a loss that I do think was preventable because if the Chargers punt that ball back to the Kansas City Chiefs, and Patrick Mahomes is almost certainly going to work some magic and they're winning that football game. I just think that is 110% the case. My problem with the Chiefs side of this thing, and I'll give the problem for the Eagles too, is that it was way too much Patrick Mahomes. The lift that Patrick Mahomes gave that Chiefs team late, it was one of those things I can't remember seeing it from a quarterback. I'm one of these guys who is constantly pushing back against what I call like the QB dominated discussions of anytime a team is really good, it's all the quarterback. When a team is really bad, it's all the quarterback. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's, football, unlike basketball, I mean, basketball is a team sport too, but football is the ultimate team sport. You can do nothing without a great team. What LeBron did, when when he was with the Cavs and places like that, kind of carrying bad teams to the finals. No, you can't do something like that in the NFL by any meaningful way. Now you can have one side of the ball stacked, the other one not, but you can't just be, oh, I'm a great QB. I'm carrying this team despite having no talent by myself. Mahomes was about as close to carrying that team to victory as possible, but it came up short because of the defense. So that's the one thing that scares me is you have injuries at the receiver position. How much more can Mahomes actually do? On the flip side, I'm not buying the Eagles hype. I know Jalen Carter wasn't in the game. I get that. But the offense against the Cowboys, this defense that wasn't supposed to be great, the Cowboys defense figured out the Philly offense. And to be honest with you, it was a lot of the Jalen Hurts scrambles that were backbreaking for Dallas. And, and the Chiefs defense doesn't look great either. But that scares me for the Eagles because when I was watching that Cowboys game, there was a lot of plays I was going, I kind of think that was a hold, and they're not calling it. There were a lot of plays that could have changed the momentum. And so I'm not buying yet this Eagles team as like locked in. They looked like they were making mistake after mistake after mistake. And the only guy that I think comes out looking beautiful from that game is Jalen Hurts. I mean, obviously you have Saquon, who's great too, but to me, Jalen Hurts proved, look, I'm the guy here. Okay, I understand Saquon's the running back who's he was setting records, and I understand we got all this talent on offense, but I'm the leader on this offense, and I'm the guy. And I thought he was the one that got him over the edge. That scares me, right? In terms of for this game, the Chiefs at home coming off a loss. The Eagles have not played pretty football so far in week one. I mean, as unpretty as the Chiefs week one was, the Eagles, I just didn't think were pretty at all, besides kind of the Jalen Hurts big plays. So right now I'm leaning heavy on the Chiefs. And I think this line being a toss up, I get it because when you factor all the data in of like obviously them getting crushed last year in the Super Bowl, I understand it. To me, this is maybe my favorite bet of the slate so far on the Kansas City Chiefs. I just think they're going to roll here, but we got to wait and see, right? And I'm not saying I could change my mind by Friday, especially if we get line movement. Okay, so we got 3 games left. The Falcons and the Vikings. So once again, look, the Falcons were very close to winning that game, ended up with a missed field goal, and that kind of, did them in. The Vikings, I mean, geez, what I don't even know what to think about them at this point. I can't remember quite as much of a game where a team played so bad for three in like 0.75% of the or not percent, 3 point out of the 4 quarters, 3.75 of part of those, they were terrible. They were absolutely terrible, right? Right from that minute left in the third quarter, I believe it was, they were garbage. To playing like an elite team from that point on. And yes, finishing a game matters, but I don't think they should be 4.5 point favorites over anybody. And I don't know yet if buying into the JJ McCarthy hype off of 1 quarter is worthy of it, right? I think that was more of a Bears job than necessarily the Vikings. So they're at home. There is a world in which I would bet them, but right now, this is a game I'm going to have to really I'm going to have to really workshop it because I just, at this point, I don't think either side is really totally like speaking to me. Next game is the Bucks and Texans. So Texans coming off a loss, obviously Bucks coming off a win. You know, it feels like this is a spot that the Bucks could be live. I really see strong arguments for both of these teams. So we're gonna have to give you more insight in this game as the week goes on. But I could see both of these teams. Look, Texans coming off a loss, they need a win. The Bucks are highly inconsistent. Look, they find a way to get in the playoffs because their division's bad. And look, I mean, they Baker Mayfield's great. They got talent. Don't get me wrong, but I could see the Texans in a must-win situation going out and getting this win. I could also see the Bucks just rolling. I mean, this is a team that has an offense with Mike Evans, the young rookie they got there now on another receiver, right? Bucky Irving in the backfield, like Baker at QB. This is a team that could do some things, and if the Texans aren't ready, they could roll in this game, right? The Bucks can come in and roll. So we'll give you more insight as we go, but that's kind of what I'm looking at here. And then finally, the Chargers and the Raiders. I mean, look, this comes down to whose stock are you buying? Because the Chargers, they beat the Chiefs in Brazil. They looked about as good as possible. Their stock could not be higher. The Raiders, I think a lot of people have bumped up their stock, but they beat the Patriots. I think it was more of a deduction on the Patriots stock than a lifting up of the Raiders. And take a look at this line. They're at home, 3.5 point favorites, plus 160 on the money line. This feels like a potential live dog to me. So we're going to keep our eyes on this game because it's going to be a battle between how good are the Chargers really and what is this Raiders team's ceiling? Because after week one, it feels like the Chargers and Justin Herbert, they're being crowned, right? As, hey, I mean, you saw the odds movement in the AFC West. Who's going to win that division? the Raiders may have something to say about it. We don't know yet, right? We don't know. We know what the Chargers can do, but that was a game in Brazil. It was, kind of a weird game that they almost blew, and it was almost vintage Chargers again, going up against a Raiders team that, look, they beat the Pats. They did what they had to do. And that to me gives me a little bit of maybe they can upset here, right? I don't know if that's going to be the case, but all I know is Charger stock has gone through the roof. And so we are not buying at a discount on this line, right? We are buying at a premium. Whereas with the Raiders, I think we're probably somewhere in the middle. I don't think we're at an all time low, but we are somewhere in the middle. So let me know what you think. What are you thinking about betting? We're going to be covering throughout the week these games so that we'll talk to you as it goes. Um, as we always say, I'm not like a professional bettor or anything. I just enjoy sports betting. So I'm just trying to let you guys in on my thought process. Maybe it says, oh, I didn't think of that, and then you put in your comments, well, you said this, but maybe you didn't think about this. Just get a dialogue going and, be able to talk sports betting because there really is nothing like it, right? There is nothing better than kind of like talking about the betting lines for hours and hours and hours on end. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.